All right. Well, hi all. Thank you again for joining us tonight for I know what is sure to be a very meaningful conversation around the practical concerns of caregiving as well as supporting communication for cancer caregivers. We do have two exceptional speakers tonight, Christina Bach and Nichole Goble. Before I let them introduce themselves, I just wanted to give a quick note about the sponsors for this presentation. We are sponsored by Merck, so we thank them for giving us the funding to have our presentation tonight. And this presentation is done in partnership with the cancer support community, as well as with the Caregiver Action Network. And so CSC, our mission is to uplift and strengthen people impacted by cancer by providing support, fostering compassionate communities, and breaking down barriers to care. And we do this through both direct service delivery, research, and advocacy. And I would love to invite Nichole Goble to speak just a little bit about the Caregiver Action Network and also the reason why we have decided to hold this presentation during the month of November. So thank you, Nichole.
Absolutely. So yes, the Caregiver Action Network, we are the nation's leading family caregiver organization that is consumer facing. That's a fancy way of saying that we provide direct supports and resources for family caregivers. And we do that for the over 90 million family caregivers in the US. Now, that may seem like a much larger number than what you have seen reported elsewhere, but that's often because they are looking at a specific segment of caregivers. So someone who is caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's, dementia, an aging loved one, or someone with a specific disease or condition. But we serve the family caregivers across the lifespan. So everyone from an individual that's just had a child diagnosed or born with a chronic condition, disability, significant health issues, to a sibling that is caring for a brother or sister with an intellectual or developmental disability, a partner caring for their loved one that has been just diagnosed with cancer. And then I think what we more stereotypically think of a caregiver is caring for that aging loved one and someone that's dealing with the impacts of aging. Yeah. So just to hone in for a second on what that 90 million represents. So they represent all kind of aspects of caregiving, all different stops on a caregiving journey. You have folks that come to us because they've just realized that they are a family caregiver. They've just entered into that role. Maybe their loved one just got a diagnosis, or they're just kind of realizing I'm in the role of a family caregiver and I don't know what to do. So someone new. There's someone who has been a family caregiver for a number of years, and we think a lot of about these folks as being kind of those that are caring for individuals with chronic conditions, disabilities, but they've been caregiving for quite some time. They come to us because maybe their loved one's condition has changed. Some of these conditions, including cancer, etc., there's a progressive nature sometimes to those. And so they need different resources, different bits of information and support as those things change. And maybe something in their life has changed, their health, or just a life logistic, and they need some additional things in their toolbox. There are folks who are balancing caregiving and work. In a recent report, I think that came out in 2020, stated that of caregivers that they had surveyed, a majority of them worked at least part-time or full-time, and additional folks were working hourly. So balancing those responsibilities at work and being a caregiver that can be a real challenge. So they come to us looking for some specific supports there. And then long distance caregiving, folks that live far away from the loved one, but are still a crucial part of their care team. There's some additional information and resources support that is needed there. So those are all the kind of 90 million caregivers and kind of the categories that they may fall into. But yes, as Kara mentioned, being here in the month of November is very special because November is National Family Caregivers Month. And one of the honors that CAN has is really leading that charge for National Family Caregivers Month. And part of that is setting the theme every year. So what is the theme this year? It is Caregivers Connect. And congratulations, you are here and you are connecting. So you are living the theme, which is why it was so important for us to hone in on that for this year. There will be some information about how to connect with us via social media. You'll see a lot of things there, sharing different resources, different caregiver stories. And that's really what we're focused on for National Family Caregivers Month. So I've just talked quite a bit about the organization that I'm from, but I should introduce myself. My name is Nichole, and I'm the Director of Community Initiatives. And I'm not going to rattle on about all the things I do there at CAN. The most important thing is that I get to do things like this. I get to go and chat with family caregivers and engage with partnering organizations like CSC, so we can find out ways that we can better support family caregivers in all of our networks. But in addition to that, as important is that I am a family caregiver. I'm a long distance caregiver. My mom was diagnosed with advanced COPD and lung cancer. So she is in Iowa and I'm in Washington, D.C. And so for the time being, I'm a long distance caregiver and very grateful that I have other family that are really there and being major support. I was also a caregiver for my grandfather when he was diagnosed with cancer and moved in with him, became kind of his roommate. So it's something that I think is very much part of our mission, and so many of my colleagues that CAN have that similar story, because as to paraphrase a very popular quote, there are really three kinds of people: people who are caregivers, people who will be caregivers, or people who will need care. And as someone also with a rare disease, I've been on that side of the coin as well. So that's enough about me. I want to turn it over to my fellow presenter, Christina.
Thank you so much, Nichole. I'm so glad to meet you and consider you connected to me now as a fellow caregiver. So important, and I'm so excited for our connection going forward. Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Christina Bach. I am my day job psychosocial content editor at oncolink.org, which is a cancer education and information website based at the University of Pennsylvania in beautiful Philadelphia. I also work with the cancer support community, our wonderful hosts for this webinar tonight, as a financial specialist on the helpline. And I talk to lots and lots of caregivers who are experiencing a great deal of distress focused on financial aspects of the caregiving experience. Like Nichole, I am also a distance caregiver to my two wonderful aging parents who live about 6.5 hours by car away in lovely Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And this last year has been a very challenging one for me and my family, as my dad has had a lot of new health conditions. And I will tell you that I may have been a social worker for 25 years, but no amount of social work prepared me for the job of being a caregiver. It has changed me and made me a better social worker. And being a social worker has, I think, also made me a better caregiver. So I'm so honored to be part of this program tonight. And I just want to say hi to some of my social work colleagues who I see are here as well. And it's wonderful to see you and have your support for this webinar and for CSC and for the Caregiver Action Network. So I'm just going to say that neither Nichole nor I have any financial relationships or affiliations to disclose, and move quickly past that slide to part one of the webinar tonight, which I'm going to be giving. And this is our agenda. I want to just really unpack for you what it means to be a caregiver, though I'm pretty sure all of you who are here could have done a better job with writing the slides for this, but hopefully I hit on things. And if there's things that you think I missed, put them in the chat, let me know. I'd love to have that kind of input. I'll talk a bit about some of the challenges of caregiving, then give you some tips and strategies for getting organized. And then I want to spend some time talking with all of us together about the importance of self-care, and that self-care is not selfish. So off we go to Caregiving 101. So what is this? It is providing support, hands-on care to folks, individuals who can't take care of themselves. I use that language really intentionally because I think that caregiving has evolved outside of the traditional nuclear family. As a single adult with a lot of friends, my friends and I absolutely care for each other when we need to provide care, whether it's short-term or long-term. So I encourage folks to think of the fact that you may be doing caregiving and you might not even know it. So it's okay for us to embrace that, even if it's not something that we're doing every day. We might need care short or long-term because of an illness, an accident, or a disability. And as I mentioned, short or long-term, and it can happen pretty much anywhere. It can happen in our homes. It can happen in the community. It can happen in someone else's home. It can happen in healthcare facilities. And that includes helping in the hospital. I know you're thinking, wait a minute, in the hospital, there's lots of staff who provide professional care. But I can tell you from being a hospital social worker for many, many years, that we couldn't take care of patients without the family members supporting us and helping us to take care of their loved ones, even though they were in the facility. So who provides care? Family. And again, remember that different people define who their family is differently. So for me, of course I have a biological family, but they're all quite far away. So I also have sort of my local chosen family. And these are the people that I might be calling on should I need help for illness. Then there are professionals who are trained and paid caregivers. And then there might be informal folks. So maybe friends, maybe neighbors, volunteers that are not paid for their caregiving services. I think it's really important for us to understand. I think hearing Nichole say 90 million really spoke to me. And of course, like this AARP study, just want to say that there's 53 million unpaid. I think that number obviously is grossly underestimated based on what Nichole shared with us a little bit earlier. And I really think even 90 million might be underestimated, because I don't think everybody is comfortable always with identifying themselves as caregiver, because perhaps the person who they're taking care of doesn't want to acknowledge that they actually need care. But also we've seen that the number is steadily ticking up. And as healthcare institutions are more focused on discharges and getting people out of the hospital or out of the facility, and health insurance companies are paying for less care in the home, we're expecting more and more of our caregivers as well. And 61% of those family caregivers, according to this AARP study, are also working. So now they've added a side gig in the form of caregiving. And that side gig can be happening at all times during the day. So even at work, it might be a text message that you get during the day. So-and-so needs this. Can you bring home this? Can you pick up this prescription? Then you get home and it's making meals. It's doing the med box. Maybe it's changing the individual, helping them with a bath, getting their clothes out. It's never ending. right? And we're also hearing that caregivers, 26%, so more than a quarter, report difficulty just coordinating care. And I think there may be several reasons for that. I know Nichole is going to unpack a little bit about just communication and asking for help. I do think that is a big barrier for folks. I hear a lot of folks say, I don't want to be a burden to my care, my family members by needing care. And I think that is really work that we need to do to understand that, most caregivers, they really want to be in this, but they need the tools and the support to do this. And that includes being able to say no at times. So what do caregivers do? As I wrote this slide, I kept thinking I should say, what don't caregivers do? Because I think that is pretty much more like they do it all. Whether it's personal care, I mentioned managing medications, and that can be picking things up from the pharmacy, ordering meds if it's from a mail order pharmacy, dealing with the insurance companies who need a new prior auth for the medication, but you have like 3 days left and the urgency is there, doing meal prep, food shopping, transportation, to medical appointments, maybe to church, maybe to the hair salon, wherever folks need to get. Also just managing the household, so paying the bills, doing the budgeting, making sure all of the utilities work, dealing with household repairs. And I think obviously the most important is the love, providing the love, compassion, and emotional support that comes about as this connection with the people we are providing care to. So what's challenging about caregiving? The physical, emotional, and financial are sort of the three realms that I'm going to focus on. So what are some of the physical challenges? And I think I full on will admit, as a hospital social worker, I didn't do a great job with truly giving caregivers the space to own that I can't lift my dad. I need help. I might need some supplies at home to do that. I can't get in and out of the bathtub. I need help with toileting. Maybe it's wound care. A friend of mine told me this story yesterday of her sister who was caring for her husband who had this terrible wound that was not healing. And he was very stubborn for her, and he didn't want anyone else involved in the caregiving, just her, which was an enormous weight on her shoulders because she's not medically trained. And she was very concerned that this wound was not healing. So she finally, with some support from her family, was able to say to him, look, I really am concerned that this is much more serious than we think it is. Can we please get you to the doctor and at least let somebody look at it? So we got him to the doctor. Turns out it was much worse, and he actually had to get admitted to the hospital. And he hated every minute of it, but it was the best thing for that caregiver because it also gave her some time to sort of regroup and work with the team in the hospital to make sure that she had what she needed to properly care for him, which included getting him to consent to allowing someone else to help with his care. The physical challenges also are potentially something that could lead to injury for a caregiver. And I definitely, and I'm sure Nichole can echo this, heard of many a caregiver who has hurt their back or stumbled upon a piece of medical equipment at night because they forget that that's where it is, or any other sorts of things. And if a caregiver is physically injured, that impacts their ability to provide care and can set off some crisis moments if they're not able to do the things that they're accustomed to be doing for the person that they're taking care of. And we can't forget about the emotional and physical exhaustion that caregivers may experience as a result of not paying attention to their own health concerns. And that we are hearing a lot about from caregivers who are just like, I haven't been to the dentist in 6 years. I just don't have time to do that. Primary care, what's that? Mammogram? Haven't had that in a while. So I think this is a really great space for us to be thinking about that. If there's no caregiver, there's no caring. And what can we do to make sure that the caregiver is getting what they need to care for themselves? And Nichole's going to talk a lot more about this, but this really was something that I absolutely experienced in this last year. It was just the emotional challenges of caregiving, in particular, like the grief that is involved when you take on a role of caregiving. I am absolutely 100% grieving for the person my dad was before he had all of these health concerns. And when you're providing care every day, whether it's distance or you're living in the same space, and you don't have time to process that grief, it can really take an emotional toll. Oftentimes we feel like we can't do enough, or we're not doing it right. We are embarrassed or worried, shame and guilt about asking others for help. Again, we're missing that old relationship. We're concerned all the time. What if something happens to me? Who will take care of them? We're always worried about the future. Can I keep doing this? Am I doing a good enough job that this is sustainable? Are there people that can help us? What if I need to pay somebody to help us? And then there's also worry. So there's anxiety that can lead up to, am I doing this right? And that can lead to other mood disturbances, sleep troubles, burnout, also just not eating, not drinking enough water, not getting enough physical activity to really take care of oneself. As I mentioned, I'm a financial expert, and while I am thrilled with medical transformation and new care that folks can get, new procedures, new medicines, that did not come for free. And care is expensive, medication is expensive, healthcare is expensive. I'm starting to think that it might be an MLM, a pyramid scheme in the US. It just feels like it's getting worse and worse. And I wonder if there's even such a thing as good insurance anymore. And I think that a lot of folks have a lot of misconceptions about what health insurance might or might not pay for when it comes to providing care in the community. And I can remember having a lot of conversations with folks about, what do you mean his insurance doesn't cover a nursing home? And really having to explain to folks what's the reality of these situations, and that care is also expensive. So a lot of caregivers are worrying about, can I afford to do this? Because maybe it means I have to work less hours. So we're going to have a reduction in income. Maybe it means that they need to hire additional support. Well, that can be very expensive. And you're also always worried about, who am I hiring? Who am I letting into my house? Do they have insurance? Are they licensed? Are they bonded? Do they have an agency that's backing them up? Am I hiring Susie from the church support group, who I know is looking for jobs, but maybe doesn't have any experience doing this? And what kind of risk am I taking by hiring her because it might be cheaper? Caregivers oftentimes say to me, I need a break. Can I get away for a few days? Who can stay with the person? And how much is that going to cost me? Or can they go somewhere else as well? And maybe they need a break from me too. Caregivers often tell me about worrying about paying for out-of-pocket medical expenses, again, cutting back work hours, not understanding options for family leave, and living in a country that does not have a national policy in place for paid family leave. If you're lucky enough to live in certain states, there are those things that are available, but in most states in this country, there is no paid family leave. And then there also seems to be a lot of misconceptions about how I can get paid to be a caregiver. And that is a way more difficult thing, because it involves an assessment from Medicaid, and that the person who needs care is deemed eligible for Medicaid. And oftentimes that's really challenging. And people are like, here's $5,000 to this cousin, and here's some money to this one, so that they can spend down for Medicaid. And then Medicaid says, oh, no, you can't do that. Yeah, we have a look back period. And then they're like, well, now what do we do? We can't get Medicaid, so I can't get paid for caregiving, and I've given a bunch of money away to my family members. So I always tell people to think about that very carefully before they pursue that. You may have to spend down assets before you can go through that Medicaid process. Then we have the other personal challenge. So who's going to do everything else? Who's going to take care of the kids, the spouse, the dogs, other responsibilities while I'm focused on caregiving? And as I mentioned, we're finding that a lot of caregivers are skipping or forgetting or missing their own medical, dental, vision, and mental health care because of their caregiving responsibilities. They cannot find space for it in their schedule. And oftentimes caregivers, and I can tell you, I have felt this way too, feel guilty, we feel ashamed, we're isolated oftentimes, lonely, and angry. We love, for the most part, being a caregiver, but we are really also worried about voicing any of these emotions as realities of our experience. And I just want to give everyone here permission to feel all the feelings. It's okay. And I think if we try to compartmentalize them and build them up for too long, it's really going to impact our ability to sustain ourselves as caregivers. So now's the time to take stock. What can I do? This was such an important question for me as a long distance caregiver. Because again, 6.5 hours by car on a good day with no traffic in Connecticut. So really 8 hours away from my parents. So what can I do from this distance? I can communicate with his healthcare providers. And how do I do that? Well, my dad made me his medical proxy and included me on his portal so that I have relationships and can communicate with the providers. And because I'm the medical person, that's my job. My sister is an attorney. And so her job was dealing with the finances and the financial POA. So when you're looking at what I can do, this is a space where it's really important to think about what are my resources. Maybe you were a chef in your life and you really love cooking. And so really that's going to be the focus of your caregiving, because cooking is something that you still enjoy doing. And it's a way for you to show your love and your affection and care for this person. But perhaps what you really need is someone to go do the shopping for you because you can't leave the home. So you want to do one thing, but you need someone else to help you do the second part. I think it is 100% essential for caregivers to also be comfortable with saying what's uncomfortable. So for example, for me, I never, ever, ever want to change my dad's diapers. That really feels unacceptable, undignified, like a huge boundary violation for me. I know I'm talking very clinical now. So knowing what I am not comfortable with doing also says, okay, this is where we're going to need potentially help. So what might I be able to do if someone taught or supported me as well? In this instance, I don't want to be taught or supported. But in some other things, I definitely could handle that as long as I had the right direction. Who can help us? Whether it's the neighbors down the block, the church group, former coworkers, the book club, whoever it is. This is the time where you're really thinking about who is possibly available. When we were going through this like acute caregiving experience with my dad, which was right around Christmas last year, I was really panicked because I was up there for 5 weeks, but I had to come home. Like I really couldn't live there and continue my work and all the other things. And I had to do that. So we put our heads together, and my dad was a coordinator of a large group of guys on Cape Cod called the Washashores, who had all moved to Cape Cod in their retirement. And he coordinated their tennis schedules for years, and they played tennis all the time. So an email went out to the Washashores, almost 100 of them, with my dad's permission about what I could tell the folks who were on the email, and saying that my dad would really like visits, that he would like some folks to come over and hang out and listen to music or watch football or play a game of chess with him. And if you're available, I said, let me know and we'll come up with a schedule. And within about a week, I had 20 guys who were like, I'm in Florida right now, but I'll be back this date. So put me down for February, or I'll come over every Monday at this time. Or does your mom need to go to any appointments? When are those? We'll plan our visits then. And then another person in that group worked for an agency up there that does something called, it's called the Village Movement. So I encourage you, I can share that resource, Kara, I'll find it for you. But basically it's Massachusetts based in this case, and it's seniors helping seniors age at home. And so my parents joined this group called Bay to Sound Neighbors, but I'd never heard of it. I heard about it from reaching out to this larger group. So you never know what's going to come from an ask for help. You might want to also, again, take stock of resources to pay for additional assistance and what that might look like. And if there's any financial support to provide that care. This is the time where you start looking for things like, do we have a long-term care policy? What resources do we have that might be able to help us to pay for additional support? And then you want to get organized. And I am a techie myself, and recognize that not everybody is, but this is a really good space to utilize our little other appendage, the cell phone, there it is, to help us be organized. There are some great apps that are available, but I just want to point out one that I have started using all the time, which is included with all iPhones. Now, I'm an iPhone girl, so if you're an Android person, maybe you can share in the chat what is similar. But the Notes app is so important to me because this is where I'm writing down the answer to bullet point 1. What can I do to help? We get asked that question all the time, and I am like, let's get prepared. So I keep a list of, this is what we need this week. We need to fill these prescriptions. We need some groceries. The dog needs to go to the vet, la, 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 la. So that when somebody says to you, what can I do to help? Oh, let me pull up my list. Here's, because that is a way to get folks really dialed into being helping to help you. And you're giving them a task, and they're usually like, a lot of people are like, what can I do to help? I want to help. And then we're dumbfounded, we don't know, or we don't want to ask them to do it. So this gives us an in. There's also some great websites like Sign Up Genius, lots of helping hands, and My Lifeline, which is part of the cancer support community, which allows you to create online communities or send out, in the case of Sign Up Genius, maybe you want to send out a list of folks to come over and do dog walks. One of my clients did that once before. She had lung cancer and she just couldn't take her dog for long enough walks that it needed. So she had her caregiver help with doing a Sign Up Genius for dog walks. And then there's websites like Meal Train or Take Them a Meal, which are great resources where folks can sign up to bring you meals or even buy you gift cards for Grubhub or Uber Eats or DoorDash. And this is a great space to also involve the whole family. What do you like? How many casseroles do you have room in the freezer for? Do you have any, food allergies or things that just wouldn't work for the family? And really, like, people, I think we have an attraction and a connection with food because food means caring, food means love, food means heart. We have family recipes and things like that. It's a great way to involve people to help out with some of those things. And again, ask a tech-savvy friend, a child, or even a grandchild to set these things up for you if you aren't comfortable, and also help you with knowing how to use them. I was just talking to one of my social work interns before this meeting, and she's working at a senior center, and her big project at the senior center is teaching them how to use technology to do this exact kind of stuff. So know that there are some resources out there in the community for that as well. Also, you want to be organized for medical appointments. And I will say that when I went to an appointment for the first time with my mom and dad, and then talked with the physician alone, I learned a lot about my mom and dad's communication with the physician by being the third party in that room. So I've encouraged my mom to write down questions before they go to the doctor or to any provider that they're seeing, Always take a list of current medications and doses with you. Because I don't know, my dad has 6 different doctors, and I feel like not a single one of them is actually calling all the shots for the medications or communicating really well about them. So it's really good to keep a list. My mom does hers on a 3x5 card. She has one for each one of them, and she writes it in pencil so that she can erase and change the updates to the doses when she needs to. Don't be afraid of healthcare providers. I know this is easier said than done, and I think that caregivers also experience something we call white coat syndrome just as much as patients do. So that is, you know, when you go to the doctor and they take your blood pressure and it's like crazy high, well, that usually is because you're nervous about going to the doctor. And I think caregivers have a similar experience as well. It's okay to say, hi, I'm Christina. I'm their daughter, and I'm here in the role of caregiver, or I'm taking notes for them today, or I might have questions as well. Also, be sure that the person you're taking care of, if they want you to be receiving medical information, that they give you the proper permissions for that information to be shared with you, especially if you are not a spouse or a biological child. This can get very nuanced. So perhaps you're a widow or a widower and you don't have children. Who do you want to be able to discuss medical issues with your care teams? And do you want them making medical decisions as well? As I mentioned earlier, it's always okay to say no or to tell your healthcare provider that you aren't comfortable with something. And I'm going to encourage you to always ask for help, clarification, and more support. And again, went through this with my own family where, you know, my mom was like, well, they want him to go to this doctor. And I was like, okay, why? And she's like, I don't really know. And so I said, okay, let's take a step back and come up with some questions and call the nurse practitioner and get some answers about why they want you to see this specialist. And it's okay, you don't have to do it in the moment either. I don't know about you guys, but I always come up with the best questions 20 minutes after I've left someplace. So that's another great application for your notes tool in your phone. You have the most brilliant thought and you've already left. Put it in your phone and make sure that you have time to discuss it later. Also, you want to think about, like I mentioned, the legal stuff. So that can include things like estate planning. Sorry, I have a very loud dog in the background trying to get himself comfortable. So I'm going to talk over him for a moment. Financial power of attorney and healthcare proxy. These are really important documents to have in place, not just for the person you're taking care of, but for you too. And social workers, navigators, community legal folks, lawyers that you know, people can help you with these documents. Also important to keep all your records in accessible location and format. And so I always tell patients, don't fill out your advance directive and then put it in the safe deposit box where no one has access to it. Make sure that folks who are named in that document have copies, who know how to access things for you. You can use a binder, you can do online, you can get access to their portal. You can put things in the cloud. You know, you can get a little flash drive like this, which is literally less than the size of one of my fingers. And this will store so many documents. And this can be really helpful for you as a caregiver to just have everything, whether it's ID, copies of prescriptions, medical records, the power of attorney, the healthcare proxy. You can put it all in one place and it's always there with you. That's just a pro tip. So you need to think also about what are the needs of other family members. So your spouse, your kids, your pets, whether it's the kids need to get to soccer. Okay, we're going to let one of the other soccer moms take care of that transportation this week. As a dog mom, the pet care is always on my mind. Who is available to help with that? What are other things that need to be taken? You need to be home for the plumber to come at a certain time, but you have an appointment at that time. Who can be there then? So the who, what, when, where, how of what needs to get done and who can be helping. So also always thinking about, what do I as a caregiver need? You have needs too. They're important. So do I need support? Do I need help? There's no more than 24 hours in a day. This is it. This is the day we have. So how do we balance between life, caregiving responsibilities, and work? When do we get breaks? And finally, how do we take care of ourselves? So that's where we get to self-care. Self-care isn't selfish. I really love this quote, that rest and self-care are so important. When you take time to replenish yourself, it allows you to serve others from the overflow. You cannot serve from an empty vessel. So I just want you to take those words for a moment and think about, how do you fill your vessel and care for yourself? So self-care is a pretty hot term these days. And I think I really love this definition of any purposeful or intentional activity you can do for your physical, mental, spiritual, or emotional health. And the thing that's awesome about self-care is it's unique. So what I love to do and I consider self-care may be completely different than what Nichole feels is her self-care, or Kara feels as her self-care, or any of you who are on this call for me today. Maybe it for me right now, it's, scrolling aimlessly through TikTok for half an hour, or 4 hours a day, or my dogs, of course, knitting and binge watching amazing television shows. And I also love to cook, and I love Philly sports teams. So I have a lot of things that really help fill my cup and make me feel fulfilled in the context of also being a caregiver. So self-care helps us to do things like de-stress, decompress, have a break, avoid burnout. And burnout is really when we just can't do it anymore. We're done. I'm cooked. I'm fried. Sayonara. Bye-bye. That's not going to work for when you are doing caregivers role. So we want to avoid that and finding balance in our needs and our duties. But of course, there are barriers to self-care. A lot of times I hear from caregivers, I don't have any more time for myself. We have to do the work to make the time to sustain ourselves. Sometimes caregivers will tell me that they're fearful of trying a new activity. I can't do a downward dog. I'm not going to yoga. I don't want to join that book club. I don't want to leave the house. I'm nervous. What if something happens when I'm away? Then there can be cost that's involved. I was working with this one social worker once who was like, I don't need another massage. Plus, like, to get a really good massage, it's like $150. And that's just not something I have. So that can be a barrier. Again, we don't like to ask for help. We're concerned that perhaps somebody will be like, did you see Susie went out on the town with her girlfriends and left her husband? Blah, blah. Don't. No. You need to go out on the town with your girlfriends. And it is incredibly important. But sometimes the negative stuff is way easier. The drinking, the smoking, the peeing on the newspapers in the house like this puppy does. I love this picture. I use this a lot when I'm giving self-care talks, not to mention that it's a beagle and I am a beagle mom. And I just think it's hilarious that sometimes these things are way easier for us to access than the things that are truly meaningful and intentional when it comes to self-care. So we really have to do the work and make the effort. So I came up with this little self-care planning worksheet, which I made available to Kara for everybody as a PDF, something that you can print out at home and play with. But these are sort of 6 domains of self-care. And I'm encouraging folks, and we actually wanted to have a little bit of an interactive moment here and ask if any of the participants would like to share what some of their self-care strategies are. So, for a workplace, I'm just going to give an example that my coworker Courtney and I are work wives, and all we do is send each other memes about going to get coffee. That is self-care for us in the workplace world. What are some of the things that you all might do for self-care? Because I also think it's great for us to get ideas from each other. I particularly am not a organized religion spiritual person, but I found great connection in nature in terms of my own feelings with spirituality. So when I go for walks or hikes, I think that's really where I find space to connect with my spiritual side as well. So just want to give everyone a moment to maybe comment, if you would, in the chat box, if you're comfortable, with sharing the things that you do. Thank you, Kara, who does yoga and watches the Great British Bake Off. Me too. Debbie, who walks, meditates, and laughs. Joyce, who reads a good history book. I love that genre. Very nice. Is it historical fiction or is it actual like real history? Oh, okay. Matha Cobb Kelly, I'm coming over to go in the hot tub with you. That sounds amazing. Relationships, agreed, Harold. And I love that you go to estate sales with friends. And I'm going to send you a list of things I'm looking for. Dawn is a worker outer. Hi, Rachel. Rachel loves her TV shows like Ted Lasso and baking. Lisa, I make it. Can we? All right, this caregiver group is going to have a bake sale, clearly, because we have a lot of bakers here. Oh, Joyce, actual history. So neat. Love that. And listening to books on tape, taking the time to go out to dinner once a month, power walking, listen to the Bible app. Love this PBS passport shows. Wow, this is amazing. Nichole, your movie date. I love it. Watching a movie with a friend. Thank you all so much for sharing these wonderful things that you're doing to care for yourselves. So, so important. And maybe some people got some good TV show suggestions, or again, maybe we can share recipes in the chat box for favorite things we like to bake. I'm thinking about baking for Thanksgiving, which is just a week away, which is hard to believe. So I think that's my portion of the presentation. Thank you, everybody. I'm still here. I can answer questions in the chat box, but I'm also really excited to listen to Nichole now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christina. And Nichole, yeah, please go ahead and everyone, if you have questions, put them in the chat, or we will be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation as well. Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Nichole.
All right. Wow. Following an amazing act there with Christina. So I love just how I think detailed and thorough Christina really talked about, I think, a lot of the basics of caregiving, the foundational pieces. It's always good, even if we think that we have them on lock, it's always good to get that refresher. But as Christina referenced, I'm going to be kind of going more into some of the emotional components of caregiving. So I'm going to be talking about the complex emotions that can come up in caregiving, the emotions that we don't like to talk about. I'm going to talk about what some of the triggers are, what can instigate some of these feelings, what are some of the causes. I'm going to talk about some ways that we can manage them, things that can help. And I'm going to talk about communicating with your loved one. And by honing in on that, I think it's not only going to speak to, why communication with our loved one is so imperative just in kind of our role day to day, but it's so important in terms of keeping that emotional keel as well. Because I think you'll see how some of that will be part of what can be tacked into some of those really complex emotions. And then I'm going to share some resources. So let's just get in. But of course, I do want to take a moment and say a huge thank you for being here. This is the favorite part of my job, is being able to chat with family caregivers, get to connect with other family caregivers. So it's really amazing to be here. So I'm really grateful. So thank you to Cancer Support Community and Gilda's Club. All right, so let's talk about what do we mean by some of these complex emotions. Christina referenced some of them, but let's explore. So these complex emotions, like I mentioned, are the ones that can make us feel like we're on a roller coaster. They can take us on these really high highs and these really low lows as we're trying to juggle all of the things that caregiving can entail. And oftentimes we are on a completely different roller coaster at a completely different theme park than our loved one. And that can be really challenging. And so that's kind of why I wanted to tie in that communication piece a little bit later as well. So let's talk about what some of these emotions are. And some of these probably seem like, yep, I felt this, I'm familiar. But again, by talking about these, hopefully we can kind of destigmatize having these feelings and really just figuring out ways to manage. So a big one is anger. And I really wanted to frame these around quotes from family caregivers talking about how they experience this emotion. Again, maybe get you thinking about how that plays into some of your own experience. I find myself getting frustrated and losing it, which upsets him and me. I find myself even getting angry briefly at him for things he simply cannot help. And then I am heartily sorry and guilty. So I really thought that this quote was profound because anger is anger. We get frustrated, we get mad about things every day. Even those of us who try to steer away from that, we can't help it. It's a human emotion. But this really speaks to how these complex emotions can interplay with our relationship with our loved one. And also, if you notice at the very end, talks about feeling sorry and guilty, which I'll talk a little bit more about as well. But it's a good demonstration about how these emotions can merge and come together, overlap. We can feel lots of these at the same time. So I want to share kind of my own experience of feeling anger. When I was caring for my grandpa, he had been given meds by his oncologist and wasn't taking them. And it was incredibly difficult to get him to take them. And I just would get so mad because this was my grandpa who would always tell me, take your meds, take care of yourself, do this, do this. And he wasn't doing that himself. And I found myself just getting so mad. And I would have to step back and be like, I have to think of a different way to approach this. Why is he not taking his meds? Maybe there's a reason. And so being able to talk through that, found out, well, his medications were making him really nauseous. And he obviously wasn't a fan of that. And so I'm like, oh, well, I totally get it now. So maybe this is information we can take to your doctor and we can see if there's some other options. And so it speaks to why it's really important to take that step back and say, okay, let's assess the situation. Why am I mad? What am I mad about? And what can be some of the kind of things going on that may be part of this. Anxiety. Here's this quote. We spent the whole afternoon at the cancer hospital today. I had to miss half a day of work. The work thing makes me anxious because I just started in November. Sometimes it just feels too much and like a really heavy burden to carry. I'm getting more anxious and depressed. So I know that Christina talked a little bit about anxiety, and anxiety can creep up in so many different ways in our role as a caregiver. We're anxious about how we're balancing it all. Are we doing a good job? How are we performing at work? Are we sloughing off on our duties because we're trying to manage things at home as well with our loved one? So I think that this quote speaks to that, but there's also the anxiety about our loved one, about their health, how they're doing, going to that doctor's appointment when you're waiting for some test results, or it's a checkup to see how things are going, if maybe a treatment is proving effective. That can be so anxiety inducing and such a challenge in that day-to-day role as a caregiver. Guilt and shame. And here's this quote. I'm ashamed to say sometimes it's hard to distinguish between caregiver and husband. And I wanted to share this quote because, and I'll mention it a little bit later as well. I think it gets to two things. Guilt is one of those emotions that can creep up into our caregiving role in a lot of different ways. Because guilt is kind of like that tack on. We experience these emotions and these feelings, and then we feel bad about it, and we don't know what to do. And so this quote is from someone who, I think like so many of us, feels like they kind of lose themselves in the role of caregiver, and that other relationship that we have with our loved one gets sloughed off a bit, gets put on that back burner. And that's no good. That's no good. And I'm going to talk more about that later. But guilt can also present itself in other ways. Guilt when caregiving ends, maybe our loved one has passed, or maybe a piece of our caregiving kind of day-to-day role has shifted. I think a lot about caregivers that I've spoken to where their loved one has moved into an assisted living facility because the needs that they had living at home were just too great to manage. And there were some real concerns. And so there's a lot of guilt in that. And of course, like I said, guilt when a loved one passes, because sometimes that when a loved one passes, we feel that grief and that sadness, but we also feel that sense of relief, a relief that our loved one is no longer hurting or in pain, or relief that, wow, that thought that may pop into our head, I have a little bit more of my time back. Those things that I lost being consumed in that caregiving role, I can now reclaim, and that can be really guilt inducing, but those are normal feelings. Again, that relief. Let's listen to this quote. What do I do now? It kind of feels as if I'm grieving and I feel guilty for feeling any relief. So again, caregiving can end. And when your loved one passes, feeling that relief, that's a challenge. And it's hard to speak about, right? Like, who do you talk to and say, wow, you know, my loved one has passed and I feel a sense of relief in this, because we feel like we're going to be judged and we don't know what to do with that. It's very complex. All right. So in addition to all of that, well, before I get started here, I want to let's get a little interactive. I'm a little inspired by Christina. I want to ask a question. Because we are going to be focusing a little bit later on communication, I want to know, and you can share this in the chat, do you feel like you and your loved one are good with communication, with having kind of that process together? Do you feel like you have a good back and forth in understanding? So feel free to put that in the chat, and I think it will kind of be illuminating once we get to that communication piece as well. All right, so back to the course here. I talked about what these emotions can be, and obviously there's about 50 more and different combinations of these emotions that we can all think of. And so let's talk about what can make these emotions harder to manage. So let's think about these as those triggers, right? Things that can make these emotions kind of feel bigger than life. So one is feeling overwhelmed, right? You heard Christina talk a bit about what are some of the practical things that caregivers do, stuff that you look at that list and you think about that. That's a lot. Plus, you're balancing all these other things outside of that caregiver role. There's so much on your plate. And when you are overwhelmed and you feel almost like you're kind of in that quicksand, it can be so difficult to check your emotions, right? I know that I feel that if I'm really stressed and feeling overwhelmed about anything, I just have too much going on. I can find myself getting snippy with people, and that's not what I want to do. So feeling overwhelmed, feeling that just like your plate is too full, you don't know how to manage it, that can be a huge piece of what can trigger those complex emotions.
And Nichole, I apologize for interrupting. There are some things that have come up in the chat, so I'm not sure if you can see, but I'm happy to read them off as well.
Sure.
Great. Yeah, we just have some folks saying, not really, our communication isn't great. Just saying, sometimes it's hard to engage the person that I'm caring for. Another person has said, yes, we, had really good conversations early on about needing to be transparent about our needs along the way. We also have someone talking about, being, afraid of communication, as well as, as their, the person that they're caring for, their cancer has metastasized, and just having, that conversation can be scary. And we also have someone saying that, no, they, as you kind of talked about earlier, that kind of losing identity within caregiving, that they don't really feel like husband and wife anymore. And another person has said the ability to share their feelings kind of comes and goes, but they, do feel that they have a willing partner. So I'm sure, Nichole, you can touch on it, but just wanted to make sure that, folks were able to see and hear all of the experiences of your fellow caregivers, and know you're not, really alone in those experiences.
Oh, that's such a perfect, I think, moment to share those, and thank you for folks who are sharing in the chat. Yes, feeling alone. So you have these feelings. We don't want to talk to our loved one about them, right? Because they're going through enough. And again, there can be a stigma or a shame that comes with some of these feelings, and that can be really isolating, make you feel alone. Where do you go? Who do you tell about these feelings? Because when you feel alone and isolated, you feel like you don't have an outlet, and that can make everything seem so much more intense. And so it's something that really can be a trigger for some of these emotions. I mean, think about, experience that a lot of people had early on in the pandemic when we were in quarantine, people feeling alone and isolated, and the impact that it had on some folks' mental health because they just kind of sat by themselves and had these thoughts, but really no avenue, no outlet to share. Lots of complexities there. So, yeah, feeling like you're alone. And hopefully, like Kara said, that sharing in the chat, you're seeing that you're not alone. Feeling uncertain. So this kind of ties into anxiety a bit, because navigating the unknown is horrifying. At least for me. Some people approach it with gusto. I'm not that person. I like to have a detailed map, itinerary. I like to know every single detail, but that's just not the way that life works sometimes, right? Lots of unknowns, lots of things change day to day, things that we haven't planned for, and each day is going to look different, and not being able to anticipate that is scary. What happens if there's an emergency and you need to take your loved one to the hospital, but you have a work meeting? You can't necessarily plan for that in a moment. So navigating some of these things, your loved one's condition, there may be lots of unknowns with that. Will this treatment work? How long do we have? Will this progress quickly? Will we be able to fight this? So many of these kind of at the heart emotional questions really center on the unknowns around the day-to-day of providing care for a loved one, and that can be really scary, and again, kind of ramp up that anxiety and some of those other complex emotions that we talked about. So Christina mentioned this briefly, and it is absolutely perfect to mention here. Other triggers to these emotions are your health, and I'm talking your physical health and your mental and emotional health. We do often put our own care, our physical care, our mental and emotional care off to the side to prioritize being there for our loved one, but that simply isn't, that's not a best practice. And I think that Christina really hit on that in talking about self-care. If you're not taking care of your physical health and mental health, it's going to be a lot more challenging to be there for your loved one, and you're gonna approach that burnout point pretty hard and fast. But how this can trigger or kind of instigate these more complex feelings, make them feel more intense. I know that if I'm not feeling well, I'm just grumpy. I don't feel well. I don't want to, like, things annoy me. I just don't feel well. So sometimes we will go a period of time and not check in with ourselves, and we'll say, wow, someone will say to us, you just seem really upset recently, or seems like you're going, something's up. Are you doing okay? And when we take a look in, it's like, oh yeah, I also haven't really been feeling well, so everything is just really intense. And mental health, the mental and emotional toll of caregiving cannot be understated. It is hard, challenging, difficult work, and it has that toll. And again, we may not be cognizant that it's happening. Those feelings of depression and those other kind of mood issues that can pop up, these can be triggering these intense emotions, these complex emotions. Also, like I had mentioned, I think at the very top, just being human. We experience anger, shame, relief. We experience all of those things that we talked about at the beginning simply by existing. We can't help what we feel, but we can help how we navigate those feelings. So again, you're not alone in feeling these. It's just part of kind of being human, and being human in, I think, doing a really hard thing in being a caregiver. All right. So we talked about what those complex emotions are. We talked about what can be those trigger points, but what do you do now? Like, what are things that can make sure that they don't get to a crisis point? Let others help. This cannot be stated strongly enough. I know as many family caregivers that I've chatted with, and even in my own experiences, it can be really difficult to let other folks help. We don't want to ask for help. As Christina said, and I loved what she said about, kind of being dumbfounded or like a deer in headlights when someone asks, is there anything that you need? Is there anything I can help you with? And then, 2 hours later, 2 days later, you're like, actually, there are 6 things I could have said in that moment that would have made everything a lot easier. And so it's important to let other people help you. Christina mentioned making a list, and this is really wonderful. Having a list, thinking through the things that you as a caregiver are comfortable sharing some of that responsibility, because a piece of this is that as a family caregiver, we want to do it all, right? We think that we need to do it all in that role, but we can't. It's simply not feasible. We get to burnout. So think about the things that you are comfortable, and they can be big things or small things, that when that friend, that other family member that's part of that care team, even a colleague at work, think of things that when they ask, hey, is there something that I can help you with? Do you need anything? You have responses. And also be proactive with this list. When you find yourself reaching a stressor point, share that list. Don't be afraid to communicate that list. Don't wait for others to ask. So it's always handy to keep that with you. I like, keeping it on a notes app in your phone so that it's always on you. But yes, finding that support and letting others help is so important. Knowing that you're not alone. Again, that isolation and feeling alone can make these feelings so much more intense and hard to deal with. Being able to hear from someone like, no, what you're feeling is okay. I felt this too. And here's how I did it. Here's how I kind of worked around this. Or here's what I did that you should not do. So connecting with peers like you are right now, I think that's so important. Share from them and learn. Share with them and, let it be kind of this back and forth learning. Call a professional. So when things get to that heightened point, call in the big guns. Make sure that you're calling in, your doctor, a therapist, especially if you start to notice that things are at a point that you simply can't manage on your own. Asking others for help, getting that support from, other members of the care team, etc. Those things aren't working. Some of those self-care techniques that Christina talked about, they're not working. Call in the professionals. All right. So communicating with your loved one. We love what people shared. And so let's talk about ways to kind of strengthen that communication so that it can be helpful not only in day-to-day things, but also in navigating some of these emotions so that you are able to communicate with your loved one about them because you are a team. So communication can change. A diagnosis of cancer, that's disruptive. It shocks the system a little bit, upsets kind of the norm that had been established. And that can can cause some of these really complex feelings to come up. So I think understanding that you need to start preparing yourself to have some difficult conversations is a really important and crucial, I think, starting point, and realizing that things will continue to change. You're entering into some difficult territory here. So anticipate change. You may not know what that change is, but it will be there. Let's talk about some of the ways that communication is really important. And I think that some of these will seem pretty straightforward. It reduces caregiver burden. It promotes that connection between you and your loved one. It can improve coping, resilience, and it can lead to better outcomes for you and your loved one as well. If you guys are able to communicate, and this comes into some of the practicalities, right? Being able to, the example that I talked about with my grandpa, him being able to communicate with me why he didn't want to take his pills and getting to that point. If we would have had a better kind of strategy, we could have gotten to that point earlier, and he could have been taking his meds as he should have been for a longer period. What keeps people from communicating? Being stressed, not having the time, feeling guilt about what you want to say, what you're feeling, not being sure. Again, kind of that deer in the headlights, like, I know that I don't know what to say. I don't know what to ask for. I don't know how to communicate kind of what's in my head or what's happening. And then fear of upsetting your loved one or anyone, and feeling vulnerable. We don't like to feel kind of exposed and vulnerable in when we share these things, and that can be a big barrier. And you want to protect your loved one. And I think there's also that mutual, you want to protect each other. You want it to be a safe space. And so you feel like, I don't want to say this because it could be upsetting. So it's important to be aware of your emotions and your needs. So this goes to what Christina had mentioned about being vocal about what some of your needs are, and not being shy about vocalizing them to folks that can be there for support. You know, when you're feeling those complex emotions, put a name to them. Name them and notice them, recognize them. That's part of getting that intervention, getting that help, and being able to manage them. If you're having difficulty, one tip, pick one emotion. If you're really dealing with anger, you're noticing that you're being a little snippy at times, track it. Notice if there are things that are kind of really pushing that button for you, because that's going to help you manage. So keep a journal. Again, that's part of that tracking. But journaling is just really good, I think, from an emotional perspective too. Just a place, where you feel like you do have an outlet to kind of share how you're feeling. And recognize that what is your need and what is the need of the other person. So how am I feeling? How may this coincide or conflict with what my loved one needs? I think is also something to be aware of when you're starting to have these conversations, because it can be part of what makes them challenging, but it is really important to be aware of. Be clear and honest. So these are some of think of these as some of like the really solid go-tos, really in any kind of like, we're having a difficult conversation, here are things that I need to have when I'm saying my piece. Use those I statements. Set regular times to talk. This can make you feel more, again, navigating the unknown, not for me, So having that time on my calendar and knowing, okay, each week I sit down and I'm going to have this difficult talk with mom about, end of life planning, about all of these things that are difficult for me and bring up some challenging emotions, but I can plan them. Consider writing down kind of the things that you want to make sure that you get out there. Identify the preferred style of communication. We all talk and listen in different ways, right? We all have different communication styles. So it's what you're saying and how you're saying it. Try different communication methods if it's needed. So try to be a little bit flexible. If what you are communicating isn't getting through, maybe you need to try a different approach, a different way. Know your limits, recognize when you are approaching perhaps a burnout point, or those emotions are getting too difficult to manage. Ask for a break. Clear your head. Take a walk. Especially if you have someone that you trust, a good friend, that will listen, having that outlet, so beneficial. And I like the stop light analogy here too, because I think it really sets like, all right, you need to stop, let's proceed with caution and go. So it's important to remember that you are a team with your loved one. You are often your loved one's advocate, talking about what they want to healthcare professionals, to other family members, friends, making sure that everyone is on the same page. So have ongoing conversations about those goals and wishes so that you know what your loved one wants and you can speak to it. Things like advanced directives, the 5 wishes, those are really useful so that it's there, it's in writing. There's, it's clear for everyone. Consider a program like the Open to Options, and this helps patients understand how to communicate goals and priorities, how to kind of sort through them. Be supportive. Notice when your loved one doesn't want to talk. We all need some time. Maybe you need a break. It's okay to take a breather and say, I don't want to talk about this right now, but we can revisit it. Be a caregiver, and this is just really communicating from that perspective of that other relationship dynamic, taking off just that sole caregiver hat if you can, and being that daughter, son, cousin, neighbor, whomever, tapping into that and not letting that relationship get lost. So I want to very quickly just go over a couple of resources that we have. The CANS Family Caregiver Toolbox. So as you can see here, this is really the warehouse of all of our online information and resources. So you can kind of see what speaks to you and click on it, and you're going to get a lot of great information. Help for cancer caregivers. So what's really, I think, unique and great about this site is that you can create kind of your own self-care guide. You get asked questions, and it will kind of populate a lot of different resources and information bits that are going to be useful for you, specifically on what you're looking for. But you also have the capacity to just look at what all the topics are and do some exploring there, because sometimes you just don't know. And the Caregiver Help Desk, one-on-one, support is so important. And there are questions, things that we want to talk about that we may feel uncomfortable. So the caregiver help desk is staffed with folks that will listen and point you in the right direction of resources and information that will support you based on whatever your issue is. Especially useful because a lot of the real services and things that you need are going to be in your backyard. Not necessarily in your backyard, but in your neighborhood. So I think that that's a really useful tool because that'll help you connect to things that are in your community. And now I'll turn it over to Kara.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nichole. We do just have a couple of minutes left, so I'll be very, very brief. We do have a number of CSE resources available as well that I just wanted to make sure you were aware of. We have our cancer support helpline, and again, Christina is a member, a specialist on our helpline. So if you do have questions or want support, especially around the finances, which is Christina's expertise, please feel free to give the helpline a call. We also have the ability to do chat on our website. And I will put, I noticed the question about the link for CAN. I will put both the CAN and the CSC websites in the chat in a moment. We also have a number of educational materials at CSC that are very specific to caregivers, especially around communication. So please take a look. And again, I will put that in the chat. We also have a digital community called My Lifeline, which is a really great space to have, discussions with fellow caregivers. So I do encourage you to do that as well. And of course, we have our CSC and Gilda's Club locations. So if you don't find what you're looking for online or want more support, please feel free to check out if there's a brick and mortar location close to you. But I will leave it just for any questions that we have, and I'll make sure you all get some links to those resources, and you will get a follow-up email tomorrow with them as well. But any questions for our speakers, as we have about a minute or so left, please put in the Q&A or chat. But I will just take the time right now as things come in, just to thank Nichole and Christina again for joining us tonight. I know I appreciated both your professional but also your personal experience with caregiving. I know as someone with aging parents and a sibling with disabilities, I fit into the I will be a caregiver someday. So I just appreciate you all for sharing the information, and for all our participants for being vulnerable as well. We don't have any questions yet, but again, if there are, just let us know. But folks are just saying how helpful they found it and very informative. So appreciate you all being here. Someone said they wrote themselves some things to do, so that's great. Already taking the good advice. Awesome. All right. Well, again, if anything does come in, I will. You'll have my contact information. My name's Kara Downey, so you'll have my email in our thank you note tomorrow. So please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. And if you celebrate Thanksgiving next week, I hope everyone has a restful and peaceful time. So I think we'll end it here. But again, thank you everyone for joining, and Christina and Nichole, thank you for being here. All right, take care, everyone. Good night.